welcome to Whispers of Ink. I'm Machado de Assis, and now I will read one of my stories.
Let's start with the book without eyes, which is part of my novels collection. Chapter 1. The tea was served in the small parlor, where the Vasconcelos couple welcomed their 4 guests. These were Mr. Bento Soares, his wife Mrs. Maria do C.U., the lawyer Antunes, and Judge Cruz. Before the tea arrived, the conversation had been about Judge Cruz's last dinner party. But when the servant entered the room with the tea tray, the topic changed to the recent death of a mutual acquaintance. Then to souls in the afterlife, followed by ghost stories, and finally to werewolves and old legends about indigenous people. For my part, said Mr. Bento Soares, I've never been able to understand how the human mind could invent so much nonsense and actually believe in it. Fine, maybe a child or two gives credit to their own illusions. That's why they're children, after all. But for a grown man, what's wrong with that? Judge Cruz interrupted, handing his cup to the servant for a second serving of tea. Life is a series of childhoods, one less charming than the next. Would you like more tea, Maria? The hostess asked Mrs. Bento Soares, who had just finished the last drop of her tea. He'd be happy to, she replied. Lawyer Antunes quickly took her cup to refill it, and his polite and graceful gesture earned him a sweet smile from her. I agree with the judge, Mr. Bento Soares said, continuing the earlier point. While Antunes returned the cup to Maria, Ducia's husband, with the same attention, but without receiving any smile in return, he passed his own empty cup to the servant. Bento Soares, meanwhile, kept talking about the foolish beliefs people held. He was deeply convinced that the entire world was no bigger than the district where he lived, and that the human race had come into existence on April 1st, 1832nd day he was born. This belief made certain psychological phenomena seem smaller, or even irrelevant. To him, the history of Earth and its people was reduced to a baptism certificate and a few local events. Bento Soares sat in the parlor, sipping his tea and listening to the conversation drift between spirits and fashion. For him, there were no prehistoric, time-sonly, pre-Socratic ones. He didn't believe in myths or old wives' tales, and it baffled him that anyone ever could have believed in them even once. The talk had split into 2 groups. On one side, Bento and the judge, along with the host, discussed old and modern superstitions. On the other, Maria Dussault and another lady chatted with the lawyer, Antunes, about the color of her dress. Maria was a striking woman, even if she was short. Her small round eyes and delicate mouth reminded Antunes of a rosebud. Her nose, he thought, could only be compared to the Tower of Gilead, if one were speaking poetically and very loosely. Her hands were elegant, pale and smooth, like lilies of the valley. They looked like they had been carved from marble, not from a statue of Venus, but perhaps from one of her descendants. He apologized for mixing sacred and earthly images, but Maria was the kind of woman who made such comparisons unavoidable. When she sat still, she could have been placed on an altar. But the moment she moved her eyes, she seemed almost dangerous. She had a way of looking at people that had once captivated Bento Soares, a man not easily impressed. Antunes thought this was perfectly natural. That night she wore a pearl-colored dress, the center of their conversation. Though Antunes agreed the color suited Bento's wife, he argued that almost any color would have suited her just as well. From this, it was easy to guess that, in his opinion, the most beautiful part of Maria was not her dress, but herself. Suddenly, a louder voice pulled their attention to the other group. Bento was saying that the judge mocked reason by claiming to believe in spirits from the other world. The judge, meanwhile, insisted that one could not completely deny the existence of ghosts. The room fell silent as the conversation shifted. A chill ran through the group, though no one could say why. The judge, known for his calm and measured words, looked unusually tense. "But, Judge," someone finally said, "this is like saying we're all ignorant fools." "Ghosts, really?" "I won't hear anything new," interrupted Cruz, the judge. "I know all the arguments against ghosts. Still, they exist. Like smallpox," another guest joked. "People say plenty about that too." "Ghosts!" exclaimed Maria Dussault. "Are you telling me someone has actually seen one?" "It's the judge himself who says so," Vasconcelos pointed out. "Really?" "Absolutely." "In the imagination," said the lawyer. "In real life," replied Cruz. The listener smiled. Unconvincedona, Maria made a face of clear disbelief. "If becoming a judge causes visions like that," the lawyer said, glancing at Bento Soares' wife as if asking for her agreement, "then I'll gladly give up any dreams of promotion." "Ghosts come from fear," she said wisely. "If you feel no fear, you'll never see a ghost." "And you?" the hostess asked. "You don't feel fear." "No more than I do of this fan," she said, holding it up. "You must feel some fear," Vasconcelos suggested. "I don't fear anything or anyone." "Well," the judge replied, "maybe not. But if you had seen what I once saw, I'm sure you'd feel differently." "Was it a witch?" someone asked. "The devil?" another added. "A ghost at midnight?" "A goblin?" someone else guessed. Cruz turned pale. "Let's talk about something else," he said quickly. But the group was now fully curious. The judge's silence only made them hungrier for the story. The men pressed him to continue, and the women joined in. Cruz gave in to the group's demand. "What I saw happened many years ago," he began. "Even so, my memory of it is still sharp. I don't know if I can finish telling it, and I already know I'll regret it tonight." Maria Dussault gave a small laugh. "Set the stage for us," she said. "Let's see the mountain give birth to a mouse." A few people smiled, but the judge remained serious and pale. Bento Soares handed him a pinch of snuff, while Vasconcelos lit a cigar. A deep silence filled the room. All you could hear was the ticking of the clock and the gentle movement of Maria Dussault's fan. The judge looked at the people around him, as if trying to decide whether he could avoid telling the story. But curiosity was written on every face. There was no way out. "All right," he said. "I'll tell it quickly. When I was studying in Sao Paulo, I rarely spent all my holidays at my father's farm. I would go to Cantagallo for a few weeks, and then return to Rio de Janeiro. I had fallen in love, and that city called me back. It was my first and last love, a 4-year passion. The church blessed it, and only death could end it. During the holidays of my 3rd year, I rented a room on the 1st floor of a house on Rua da Misericordia. On the 2nd floor lived a man who looked 50, though he was only 40. He seemed worn out and had gray hair. We were the only 2 residents, unless you count my servant, who made the 3rd person in the house. The man upstairs had no servant at all. I first saw him the day after I moved in. As I walked through the hallway, I saw him on the stairs. He was going from the 1st to the 2nd floor and had stopped halfway. He stood there holding an open book. One foot was on the 5th step, the other on the 6th. I looked up at him for a while. Not knowing who he was, I even wondered if he might be a thief. My servant told me later he was the man who lived upstairs. 2 days later, I was at home reading in the living room. It was almost 11 at night when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it and saw my neighbor. He had come down, again holding a book, maybe the same one he had 2 days earlier. "I hope I'm not bothering you," he said. I made a hesitant gesture and looked at him, waiting for an explanation. "The shop owner downstairs," he continued, "told me today that you are a student. Maybe you can help me. Do you know Hebrew?" "No," I answered. He looked down at the book in his hands and then up at the ceiling. After a few quiet moments, he turned to me and said, "I've been trying to get into a passage from the book of Jonah." As he spoke, he sat down and opened the book on his knees. I say knees because that's what they're called, even though in his case, his legs were nothing more than 2 thin sticks so thin they looked like pegs. His face was sharp and bony, his eyes sunken, his hair wild, his hands hairy and full of wrinkles. He looked like a character from some strange dream. He stayed quiet for a while longer, then went on. "There's a verse in Jonah chapter 4, verse 11. It says, 'And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left?'" What do you think that means? At once, I thought he must be crazy. What else could he be, coming to visit me at this hour, barely knowing me, to ask about a verse from Jonah? I wasn't afraid back then. He was as fearless as Lady Donna Maria do so herself. I just sat there, silent, trying hard not to laugh. "What do you think?" he asked again. "Well," I replied, "what do you expect me to say? People who cannot tell their right from their left, the usual meaning is clear. It refers to children. Jonah is talking about the children of Nineveh. God wants to spare the city for their sake. That's the old way of seeing it," he said. "But I have a new reading, one that will shock the world." "Oh." "Yes. Jonah is not talking about children. He's talking about left-handed people, the ones who cannot tell right from left because they are naturally the opposite. See how important my reading is?" He looked at me with the air of a man who had just won a great victory. I couldn't argue with him. His confidence was too strong. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and agreed. I told him his idea must be true. "Don't you think so?" he asked. I wasn't sure. I didn't know much about Hebrew. I wanted to check if the original text in the Bible was translated correctly in the Vulgata version. I also wanted to know if the phrase used in the Bible was exactly the same or if it was different. Once I cleared that up, I could write a whole book about it. "You don't know Hebrew at all?" he asked. "I don't even know the alphabet," I replied. Well then, I must ask your forgiveness, he said, standing up. He bowed politely and started walking toward the door. But then he stopped. He turned around and said, I almost forgot to tell you my name. That should have been the first thing. My name is Damasceno Rodrigues. I've lived here for 3 years now, and am always at your service. Goodbye. He didn't wait for me to give him my name. He simply bowed again and left. You can imagine how I felt. At first, I wanted to laugh. But then I felt pity, fear, and curiosity all at once. The next day, I asked my servant to find out more about Damasceno Rodrigues. He did as I asked. What he found out was this: my neighbor had lived there for 3 years, just as he had said. He was an old doctor who no longer practiced medicine. He lived quietly, only leaving his house to eat at a nearby restaurant or to read for 2 hours at the public library. People in the neighborhood didn't think he was crazy. But some old women believed he had a connection with the devil. He looked like he had seen a ghost. I could tell right away that something was off. The way he stared at the ceiling, lying there in that hammock, like he was waiting for something or someone. His whole place felt like it belonged in another time. I mean, the furniture was so old it looked like it might fall apart if you even looked at it wrong. There was this weird mix of stuff everywhere. A broken teapot next to a bust of some old guy, papers and books scattered on the floor, curtains with holes in them. It was like stepping into a forgotten world. I knocked on the door, but he didn't hear me. I guess he was too lost in his thoughts. So I just walked in. He didn't move at first. Then he lifted his head a little. "Who's there?" he asked. "It's me," I said. "You again?" he muttered. "Your neighbor from downstairs." "Oh," he said, sitting up slowly. "Come in." I told him I didn't want to bother him, that I was just returning the visit. But honestly, I was curious. Everyone in the building talked about him, you know. Said he never left his room, that he had secrets. And I wanted a story. Something worth writing about. He got up and offered me a seat. "The best chair," he said. But it had no back. The other two were even worse. He only had only 3 legs, and the other was missing most of its straw. He laughed when I sat down. That laugh, it was strange. Like it didn't belong to him. When he was serious, he looked like a skeleton. When he laughed, it was like the devil himself had walked into the room. I wanted to get him talking. I asked him about that story he was writing. You know, the one about Jonah. "Did you find anything new?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "But don't think I haven't thought about it." "I figured you had." "Well, I didn't," he said. "Not after the next day, anyway." And that was it. He didn't say much else after that. Just went back to staring at the ceiling like before. But I left with more than I came for. Because sometimes, the silence says more than the words. Damasceno and I were sitting in his small, dimly lit room, the kind of place that felt like it had secrets buried in every corner. I was trying to make sense of something Head mentioned earlier, about the devil being called Kenhoro. But before I could finish my thought, he cut me off with a cold, mocking laugh that shut me up completely. I didn't feel like pushing the conversation anymore, and honestly, I didn't have much else to say. He, on the other hand, shoved his hands into his pant pockets and started pacing back and forth across the floor. Sometimes he looked down, deep in thought and silent. Other times he stared at the ceiling, whispering something under his breath that I couldn't catch. There was something strange about him. He looked older than he probably was, and his face carried a sadness and bitterness so strong it made you want to look away. At the same time, there was something fascinating about him. His behavior was so unusual, so different from everyone else, that even though he was hard to understand, you couldn't help but feel drawn to him just to escape, for a moment, the boring normalcy of everyday people. He walked like that for about 8 minutes, without saying a word. Then he stopped right in front of me and asked, "Young man, what do you think about the moon?" I told him I didn't know much, just a few basic things. "I figured," he said with a smirk. "The kind of thing you read in school books. But those books, they teach nothing. Their knowledge is shallow. What I want to know is this: what do you really think?" "I can guess," I said. "Then say it. You want to know if I also believe the moon is inhabited?" No, he replied, shaking his head. "That's just fantasy, wild guesses. The moon, my dear neighbor, doesn't exist. It's just an idea, a trick of the senses, a picture made by our eyes. That's what science has never dared to say. That's what needs to be shouted to the world. On certain days of the month, the human eye goes through a kind of nervous reaction, and that's what creates the illusion of the moon. During those times, we think we see a round, white, glowing circle in the sky. But that circle is actually inside our own eyes." "That could be true," I said. "It's the only truth," he replied firmly. "So does that mean we're all moonstruck?" I joked. "Maybe," he said, laughing harder than I expected. He sat down across from me, still chuckling, and dropped into the hammock. His legs, loose inside the tight trousers, crossed in the Eastern way, and he just stayed there, looking at me. "Lunatics," he said again. "Well," I replied, "given your theory?" "My theory? Lunatics? I'm sorry. I didn't mean that." At that point, he stopped listening. With his fingers up in the air, he began drawing wild shapes, lines, curves, angles, triangles, laughing for no reason, with that pale, empty laugh you see in madmen. There was no doubt about it. This was a soul without reason. I regretted something I had said without thinking, and at the same time, I looked for a polite way to leave without upsetting him. It wasn't hard. I said goodbye 3 times, and he never answered. I left, and he didn't seem to mind. When I got back to my room, I felt something close to relief, like when you escape from danger or avoid a bad situation. Talking to a man like that, someone clearly out of his mind, wasn't safe. I had thought I was dealing with a strange but clever man. Now I realized I was dealing with a madman. My interest either faded or changed completely. I decided to cut all ties with Damasceno right then. For 15 days, I saw him twice on the stairs. He greeted me and spoke like a man in full control of his thoughts. He only complained about some headaches and heart palpitations. "I fear this might be the end," he told me the second time. "Don't say that. You'll see." I'm standing at the edge of eternity. I'm about to take the final leap. I didn't keep talking and just walked away. That night, my servant told me that Damasceno Rodriguez had come looking for me insistently, saying he wanted to share a secret with me. It was probably another fantasy, like the one about Jonah or the moon. I had no wish to encourage the madness of an old man in pain. I sent no word that I was home, and I avoided him. Late that night, while I was reading, I heard a groan from the floor above. I climbed up quietly, put my ear to Damasceno's door, but heard nothing else. The next day, I learned that Damasceno had fallen ill. I went to see him around noon. Since he never locked his door, I didn't need to bother him to come in. I found him lying on his bed, eyes shut tight and arms stretched out along his body, outside the blanket. He opened his eyes and smiled when he saw me. "What's wrong?" I asked. "A heaviness in my chest," he said. "Did you take anything? Anything that could hurt me?" "No, any medicine." "I didn't take anything." "All right. We need to figure this out." "I'll send for a doctor." Damasceno had his eyes fixed on the wall and didn't answer me. I was about to leave the room to tell my servant to call the doctor when I saw the sick man sit up suddenly in bed. He stared at the wall near the foot of the bed and cried out in distress. "No, not yet. Go away. Come back in a year, 2, 3. Go away, Lucinda. Leave me alone." I rushed to Damasceno, spoke to him, touched his forehead, which was burning hot, and made him lie down again. Once he was lying down, he was breathing heavily, staring at the ceiling, refusing to look toward the foot of the bed. "What do you feel?" I asked. He said nothing. Maybe he didn't hear me. I left to call the doctor and returned soon after. Damasceno was asleep. The doctor arrived, examined him, asked him questions, and finally wrote a prescription, which I sent immediately to the nearest pharmacy. I also sent someone to a nearby house to prepare soup and chicken broth. I decided not to leave the house that day. But I hadn't counted on love. 2 lines written on a piece of embroidered paper, like the kind we used back then, changed my plans. I left, after giving my servant many instructions and promising to return soon. At 8 that night, I was back home and went straight to the sick man's room. He looked calm. Come in, my friend," he said. "Let me call you that because I have no one else left to whom I can give that sweet name. Are you feeling better?" "I am. But these are only temporary improvements." "Don't say that." "But they are. This won't last long. Do you know what death is?" "I can imagine." He looked at me with a quiet skepticism before turning his eyes to the spoon of medicine I was offering. "You don't understand," he said. "Death is a worm. There are 2 kinds, son, that enters the body, and one that enters the soul. Either way, it kills. But in my case, it didn't enter my body. My body suffers only because the illness echoes through it. The worm is in my soul. That's where I feel it, chewing away at me every single day." "Then let's kill the worm," I replied, offering the spoon again. Damasceno stared at the medicine, then at me, and gave a faint smile, calm and disbelieving. "Poor boy," he said after a pause. Let's go then. Not now, I insisted. Tomorrow or the day after. Maybe even after you're gone, it could still help your body. The soul doesn't drink water, he said simply. I tried again, but it was useless. Damasceno refused to take even a drop. When my efforts became too much for him, he began to show signs of irritation. I feared another fit of madness brought on by his worsening condition, so I gave up. I went to speak with the servant, who told me that Damasceno had taken only 1 spoonful of the medicine and some broth earlier. I returned to the room. He was calm now. The light was dim, and the combination of his illness, his troubled face, and the memories that already tied me to him made the moment unbearably heavy. I sat beside the bed and took his pulse. It was fast. His forehead burned with fever. He let me do all this without a word. His eyes were fixed on the ceiling, as if he were completely unaware of my presence or the situation. Soon after, the doctor arrived. He learned of Damasceno's refusal to keep taking the medicine, examined him, and sighed with disappointment. As he left, he told me plainly that the man was beyond help. That news did not sit well with me. I couldn't just leave him alone, and I might have to witness his death that very night. I called the servant and wrote a note to 2 colleagues of mine in São Paulo who were staying in the city, asking them to come spend the night with me. The servant left, and I sat once more by the bed. A few minutes later I noticed that Damasceno was restless. I asked him what was wrong. Nothing, he replied, shifting in bed. What time is it? 9:15. Do you plan to stay with me all night? Of course. His face lit up. You're such a kind soul, he said. Then he reached for my hand and held it between his for a while, looking at me with gratitude. That look softened his otherwise harsh and tired face. What have I done to deserve such kindness? He asked after a silence. Let's not talk about it. Damasceno fell quiet. How old are you? 22. Lucky you. Lucky you. He fell silent again, as if lost in thought. I thought he might fall asleep, but then he turned to me and said, I want to repay your kindness. You can do that later. No, I must do it now. He sat up slightly, leaning on his elbow, took my hand again, and stared into my eyes with sudden intensity. Young man, he said it in a low, serious voice, never look at another man's wife. Never. Please, calm down. And above all, never make her look at you. If you do, you'll lose your peace forever. The seriousness in his voice made it impossible to think he was mad. Even his face seemed to show he was fully aware again. I looked at him for a moment, too stunned to ask anything. Damasceno gazed into the air, looking deeply sad. He shook his head 3 times and sighed. Then he let his head fall to one side and lay still. When the 10 o'clock bell rang, he opened his eyes again and turned to me. Why don't you go to sleep? I'm not tired. To waste a whole night on a stranger. Don't worry about me. Rest. It's better for you. Then he slipped his hand under the pillow, searching for something. It was a key. He handed it to me. Open the little drawer in the dresser, the one near the street window. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking again. And then? Take that small box over there. The box was made of leather and about the length of a hand. When I brought it to him, he placed it on the bed and stared at it in silence. Then he pressed a small latch. The box opened, and he pulled out a small bundle of papers. "If I die," he said, "burn these. Close it again. It's better that way." "No need. This is a secret, but I don't want to die without telling you. Didn't I just say I would never allow myself to look at or be seen by another man's wife? Well, then you will know the rest." Curiosity shone in my eyes. Even though the light in the room was low, he might have noticed it. I thought I saw a quiet, knowing smile on his lips. "These are family papers," Damasceno went on. "Things that matter only to me. But here is something you can see right now." As he said this, he pulled a tiny painting from the bundle and handed it to me, asking me to look at it closely. I stepped closer to the light and saw the beautiful face of a woman. Her eyes were the most expressive I had ever seen in my life. When I gave the painting back, I noticed he quickly turned it away from his eyes and slipped it between the papers with trembling hands. "Did you see her?" "I did." "Don't tell me what you think. I can imagine your reaction. Picture how I felt 15 years ago when I stood before the real woman. She was 20 years old. I was 25. Damasceno stopped talking. Perhaps he regretted what he had said. And I, in that moment, dared not push further or show more interest than I already had. In the meantime, he tied the bundle of papers and the miniature together with an old string and handed everything to me. "Keep this," he said. "Will you burn it?" "I promise." I placed the bundle in my pocket. He leaned back, relaxed, and stayed quiet. For 5 minutes, he said nothing. Then he began to whisper words without meaning, making faces that reminded me of a madman. That moment brought me back to reality. He looked at me with a strange expression, as if trying to decide whether to trust me. Wouldn't those papers in the portrait just be worthless things, which he, in his madness, gave too much meaning to? Damasceno spoke again. "Did you keep them?" "I did." "Let me see." "It's right here," I told him, showing him the bundle. "Good." After a pause, he continued, "I was young, and she was young too. Both innocent and pure. Do you know what destroyed us? A single glance." "A glance?" "Yes. It happened in the countryside of Bahia. Lucinda had married in the capital to Dr. Adarit. It doesn't matter his name. He was a doctor like me, but rich and interested in botany and mineralogy. At that time, he was traveling through Jeremobo. I met him at a sugar mill and we became friends. His wife was as beautiful as you saw in the portrait. He was intelligent, quiet, and jealous. She was so modest and shy, perhaps even afraid that his jealousy could sleep with the doors open. But that wasn't how he was. He was cautious and suspicious. He threatened her and made her suffer. I saw that, and pity took over me. Pity is a dangerous feeling. Avoid it or fight it. Who knows if the pity you feel for me now won't bring you harm?" I shivered at his last words. He paused for a moment, and then went on. Lucinda never looked at me. It was fear, perhaps because her husband had warned her. When she spoke to me, it was coldly, and with short, simple words. My heart slowly moved from pity to love, through the most natural slope. A silent, careful love, with no hope or return. One day when I saw her sadder than usual, I dared to ask if she was suffering. I don't know what tone my voice had, but Lucinda trembled and looked up at me. Our eyes met. In that single minute, or rather, in that single instant, they said everything that was inside our souls. She blushed and looked down again, a gesture of modesty that was in truth a confession of her guilt. And I stood there, quietly watching her. I was still caught up in that strange moral daze, when a sudden voice shattered the silence and pulled me back into reality. At the same moment, the figure of her husband appeared right in front of us. I have never seen such a terrifying expression on a human face. His anger turned him into something monstrous, like a living Medusa. Lucinda fell to the floor, unconscious and helpless. I stood there, stunned, too confused to explain or even ask for an explanation. He looked at me, then at her. The first wave of his rage had passed, but what followed was even worse, a quiet, icy determination. Without a word, he motioned for me to leave. I tried to speak, but he silenced me with a sharp look. As I turned to go, I hesitated, and despite his clear refusal, I tried to explain how strange and suspicious his behavior seemed. He listened without a word. Realizing I wouldn't get anything from him, and not wanting Lucinda to suffer even the smallest doubt or pain without a serious reason, I told him straight what I felt, my true feelings for both him and her, the deep affection I had for Lucinda. I swore, with all my strength, that she had done nothing wrong. He simply laughed and said nothing. I said goodbye and walked out. Now, as he recalled those memories, the sick man seemed to grow weaker. His voice, when he reached this part, became hoarse and soft. He paused for a long time, covering his hollow, pale eyes with trembling hands. After a few minutes, he went on. Some weeks passed. One day, I had to travel to Jaramobo for work. On the way, I couldn't stop thinking about Lucinda, and I admit I was afraid of hearing something bad. But what I heard was worse than I could imagine. Lucinda was dead. The person who told me crossed themselves in fear and refused to say anything else, no matter how much I begged. The idea that her husband might have killed her took over my mind. But I didn't dare ask. I kept asking around, and some said she had taken her own life. Others claimed she had just disappeared. A few believed she was only very sick, near death. This confusion in the stories only made me more certain that something terrible had happened or was still happening. I went to the husband's estate, determined to find out the truth and, if possible, save the innocent girl's life. Damasceno paused again. He looked tired and deeply troubled. I asked him to stop for a while and leave the rest of the story for tomorrow, even though I was burning with curiosity. At the same time, I was amazed at how clearly he told me everything, with such emotion in his voice, nothing like the confused, scattered words of a madman. Was this the same man who had once asked me about Jonah and shared a strange new theory about the moon? While I wrestled with this question in my mind, Damasceno shifted in bed, trying to get more comfortable. The candle was almost burned out, so I lit another one and walked to the window, anxious to see if the servant or the two friends I had written to had arrived. The street was empty. Only far away could be heard the footsteps of an occasional passerby. I returned to the bedroom. Damasceno was now sitting up in bed, leaning slightly on the pillows. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Come closer. Listen to the rest of it. It's short, but you'll learn something." I went to the doctor. As soon as he heard I had come to see him, he came out to greet me with a smile. I told him straight out what I had heard about his wife, the many rumors, the different versions of the story, and I explained how important it was to tell the truth and clear his name of terrible suspicions. He listened in silence. When I finished, he said I had done the right thing coming to him. Then he told me Lucinda was still alive, though she might not survive the next day. He said that after thinking about how to punish the girl for the way she had looked at him, he had decided to punish only her eyes. I didn't understand what he meant. My legs trembled and my heart raced. I would not have followed him for sure, if he hadn't grabbed my wrist with his iron grip and dragged me into an inner room. When we got there, I saw, it was horrible. I saw Lucinda's still body lying on a bed, groaning in a way that tore at the heart. "Look," he said calmly. "I only punished her eyes. The sight that met me, Thini, will never, ever forget it." The poor girl's eyes were gone. He had burned them out the day before with a red-hot iron. I recoiled in horror. The doctor grabbed my wrists, shouting with all the rage in his heart, "The eyes sinned, the eyes paid." The sick man's head rolled back against the pillows while I, stunned by what I heard, and by the look of real horror and terrible honesty on his face, turned my eyes around the room as if searching for a way to escape. Damasceno stayed there, breathing hard for a long time. Suddenly, he shivered, lifted his head, and stared at the wall at the foot of the bed. "Go away," he cried out, full of pain. "Go away. Not yet. Look. Look. There she is. There she is." His thin, trembling finger pointed at something in the air, while his eyes, no fixed and lifeless, showed every bit of terror the human soul can bear. Without thinking, I looked at the spot he was pointing to, and I swear to this day, I have never forgotten what I saw. Standing there, next to the wall, was a pale woman, the same one from the portrait, with her hair loose, and her eyes, those eyes were nothing but two bloody, empty holes. In that dim light of the sick room, up in a lonely house at such a late hour, between a madman and this ghostly figure, I admit I felt my strength and even my mind slipping away. My jaw shook, my legs trembled. I was frozen to the bone. I don't know what happened after that, not even how long it lasted, because my own eyes seemed to go dark, and I lost all sense of myself. When I finally came to, I was lying in my room, and beside me stood the two friends I had sent for. They both tried to keep my thoughts away from what had happened in Damasceno's room. But it was useless. They didn't understand that I remembered nothing at all. The shock had been so great that the past, as if by magic, had vanished completely from my mind. I woke up exhausted after a long, restless night, swinging between anxiety and despair. Just before dawn, I finally fell asleep. When I opened my eyes again, the sun was already high in the sky. That's when it all came back to me, the events of the previous night. Just remembering them made me shiver and left my soul cold. I wanted to go see the old man because, despite everything that had happened, I still felt pity for him. This poor soul condemned to see that awful vision forever. "It's too late," someone told me. "Why?" I asked. The patient passed away. I felt a tear escape my eye, the only one he would ever get from any of us. My colleague said he had died just as the morning broke, with one of them and the servant present. Damasceno spent his final moments talking about strange, disconnected things, wars, meteors, St. Thomas Aquinas. His last act was to reach out, as if trying to hug the sun he claimed was standing right in front of him. He was gone. Or as one of my colleagues put it, he had finally returned to eternity. To him, Damasceno had seemed like a ghost who had borrowed a body for a short time before going back to where he truly belonged. I couldn't go to the funeral, he was too weak and shaken. But a friend of mine went to the cemetery in my place. For that night, and many after, I stayed at a colleague's house. I couldn't bear to sleep under the same roof where that terrible vision had appeared. The authorities took everything that belonged to Damasceno Rodriguez. He had lived off rent from 2 small houses and a few government bonds they found in his possession. He had no heirs. It took me many days before I dared to look again at the portrait of the woman he had given me. Even then, I did so with fear, and I regretted it almost immediately, because the whole scene replayed in my mind as if it were happening all over again. The woman from Jeremoabo was incredibly beautiful, a martyr, yes, but also a woman of such striking beauty that I could understand not only Damasceno's madness, but also her husband's rage. The judge paused. The room was silent, filled with a strange mix of discomfort and awe at what he had just told us. Vasconcelos was the first to speak. "We can't doubt that you saw this woman," he said. "But how do we explain what happened?" "The difficulty is greater than you think," the judge replied. This story had an ending we didn't expect. When I told some people about the vision, no one believed me. The most polite ones said it was just a nightmare. I stopped talking about it to avoid being called ridiculous. Later, when I was calm again, I decided to write about Damasceno's tragedy in a newspaper we published at the Academy. When I tried to learn more about that poor man, I discovered something that surprised me deeply. He had never been to Bahia, and had never left the South. By then, my reason for writing wasn't just literary. I wanted to clear up a mystery and understand a strange event. He had married at 22 in Santa Catarina and only left there at 33. So he couldn't have met the original of the portrait at 25 single in Jeremoabo. And finally, the miniature he had given me was simply the picture of his niece, who had died young and unmarried. There was no doubt. The story he had told me was an illusion, like the moon's reflection in water, a simple illusion of the senses, a fantasy from a troubled mind. But if that's true, then how did I see the woman without eyes? That was the question I asked myself. That I saw her, there's no doubt, as clearly as I see you now. The great minds of science, the observers of human nature, may one day explain it. How was it that Pascal saw an abyss beside him? How was it that Brutus once saw the shadow of his evil spirit? Maybe your case is simpler than all of those, the judge said. The man's madness might have affected you, and made you see what he believed he saw. Well, that's a shame, the judge added. The story of Lucinda would have been better if it were true. The judge spoke again, his voice steady but sharp. Who could be a greater rival to Othello than this husband who burned the most beautiful eyes in the world with a red-hot iron? Simply because they had looked at another man's eyes? Do you believe in ghosts now, Donna Maria Dussault? Maria Dussault kept her eyes down. She didn't answer right away. When the judge addressed her directly, she shivered, as if waking from a dream, and slowly lifted her gaze. The lawyer sitting beside her did the same. But then he stood and walked to the window, perhaps to catch his breath, or maybe to think. Suddenly aware of the danger of one day misreading a line from the Bible, just like the man who had destroyed beauty out of jealousy.
Thank you for listening so far. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like our channel and click the bell to be notified whenever a new book is read. Have you heard of Machado de Assis? Machado de Assis, born in Rio de Janeiro in 1839, is considered one of the greatest writers in Brazilian literature and a master of psychological realism. He was a novelist, poet, playwright, and short story writer whose works explore the complexities of human behavior with irony, subtlety, and deep introspection. Among his most famous novels are Dom Casmurro, which questions truth and memory, and the posthumous memoirs of Brás Cubas, a satirical narrative told by a deceased man. Machado's literature often reflects the contradictions of Brazilian society, addressing issues like race, class, power, and identity in a sophisticated yet accessible style. Despite being born into poverty and facing racial prejudice, Machado de Assis rose to become the president of the Brazilian Academy of Letters and a symbol of literary excellence. His sharp wit and profound observations about society and the human soul make his works timeless and universally relevant. Today, he is recognized not only as a Brazilian icon, but also as a world-class author whose legacy continues to influence generations of writers and thinkers. Machado de Assis shows us that literature can be both elegant and critical, intimate and universal, humorous and profound. His stories remain as powerful and thought-provoking today as they were more than a century ago. Machado is a treasure of world literature, and through his voice, we discover the infinite layers of the human experience.